Gordon, Lenny wants to talk to.
Okay, are we recording? We are recording, right? All right. Good thing I asked. All right, thanks, everybody. Let's start the meeting. We have some of our members have time constraints. Even with the time constraints, though, we know that this is a very important meeting and an important discussion to be had. So I just want to start the meeting right now. Before we start, I've asked Pomai to get us started by opening protocol and sharing some manao. So Pomai, you might.
Yeah, mahalo nui chair velina mai na kini and a mamo and a lehulehu o Hawaii ne aloha no. Mahalo nui to all of you who are joining us and gathered today for this particular point in time, this wa'olaho. I would like to start us off this morning by participating in Malana Mai Ka'u. It is always, I believe, a good opportunity for us to remind ourselves that first and foremost, Hawaii is an island. Having six moku, or six ahupo, if you will, that make up the fabric of who our families are and who our community is. The fabric of those communities, those six moku, are held together by Mauna Kea, who is the sealant. And so that sealant, this Mauna, brings us together. And in the chant itself, it speaks of how the work that we all do is done in ohohia. And sometimes you can translate that term to be exuberant and you can think about it in the sense of joy. And yet we also know that there is energy, devotion, and especially the essence of aloha that enables that work to move forward. And so this morning, offer the oli, malana mai ka'u, ho'okahi manawa. Wherever you are, please join us. And then we can hold on more from there. Mahalo no. Malana mai ka'u me puna me hilo, hele mai kona me kohala me hamakua e ka ele ho ai pio e pola o mahiki, he uka o ai mea he awa ka wai hai, he kupe no ka wa o poli au, he pala mauna awa ke a iruna, a kuahiwi kia I ka wa. Oh, ia I ka hana tue, I also just want to share that, you know, these particular words that was put to air, that was given in air, is actually the visual of Emalani when she was at a certain height in a certain platform on the flank of Mauna Kea. On Mauna Kea, looking and observing the entirety of Hawaii Island from the space of Mauna Kea. And so the wisdom of our kupuna definitely beats through and jumps through everything that it is that we do. Let it be the words of passion, again, energy and devotion that speak and resonate today. And always and always and always let the essence of aloha prevail. Me ke aloha nui. Mahalo.
Mahalo, Pomai. Thank you for sharing your words of wisdom. We appreciate it. So, as all of you know, the one item that we have today is to consider the potential hiring of John DeFries as the first executive director of MKSOA. So this is what the process that we're going to go through today. I'm going to take the initial step to describe more for people that are watching what our process was in terms of how we got to where we are today. Basically going through, you know, what we did and who was involved, etc. Then after that, I've asked Mr. DeFries to kind of introduce himself, not to the authority members, but more to people that are watching. So I'm going to give him between 5 and 10 minutes to introduce himself to to all of you that may be watching this. And then what we're going to do is we're going to open it up for public comment. We have 4 people that have signed up via Zoom to provide their manao and testify. We also may have people that are present in the room at the DOFA office that wish to share their testimony. We have posted a lot of the testimonies, both for and against, that are on our webpage that people can review. After listening to those that testify, I'm going to ask the authority members whether or not they have any questions of Mr. DeFries, and then we'll take up a motion following that discussion to see whether the authority members are in a position to agree or not agree to a contract with Mr. DeFries. So that's the process. So let me start by talking about what we as an authority have done to get to the point of where we are today. The first step we had to do was to create a job description of the executive director. Again, having not had staff, I think back at that time when we started this process, the authority members actually helped put together a description of job description of what we were looking for in an executive director. We then posted the job opening, and we actually left it open for some time. We posted the job opening from September 25th, 2023, and left it almost open for a month until December 14th, 2023. During that time frame, we received applications from 9 candidates seeking to potentially become the executive director. Once we closed the posting of the job, we appointed a screening committee chaired by Paul Horner of the authority, and with Laura Kakua and Pumai Brodelman as part of that screening committee. They were asked to sort of narrow down the list of the applicants to individuals that they thought we might interview. They came back and indicated that they thought that it was appropriate for us to interview 4 candidates. And in fact, during the last week of December, we had a full board participation and individually interviewed each of the 4 candidates. Following that, in a subsequent meeting, we actually sat down and discussed the pros and cons as people saw it on the authority about the 4 candidates. Prior to that discussion, we actually went around the room and made sure that no one had a conflict which would prevent them from being fair and impartial to all candidates. So part of the discussion was what relationship people had or prior dealings people had with some of the candidates. And at the end of that, all of the authority members agreed that notwithstanding whatever prior relationships or contact they had with all of the candidates, that they thought that they could be fair and impartial in this process. So with that, we then, at the next meeting, had a generalized sort of discussion about the candidates and where people thought we should fall. The group, the authority members, then authorized me to, directed and authorized me to start discussions with Mr. DeFries to see whether or not a contract could be entered into for him as an executive director. At the time that we posted the job description, we indicated that the salary range for the executive director, which we based upon reviewing other executive directors within the state system, the range was quite wide, was between 165,000 to 225,000. But that was posted originally when we posted the original job description and sought candidates. Based upon that, I entered into negotiations with Mr. DeFries, and we came to an agreement that we would be paying him annually $200,000 a year. We also agreed that we would enter into a 3-year agreement. However, the 3-year agreement is conditioned on 2 very major points. One being that this agreement is an at-will agreement. And what that means, for those of you that may not be familiar with what at-will means, is that at any point in time, the board, for cause or without cause, may decide to part ways with the executive director. On the other side of it, with the same rights, the executive director at any point in time may decide, for cause or without cause, that he would be leaving the relationship with us. The second really important caveat to this 3-year agreement is that we are funded by the legislature, so that one of the conditions is that we can only continue to hire you if we are continually to be funded. So that if we lost legislative funding, the agreement would also be terminated. So a 3-year agreement with an at-will clause, as well as contingent upon us receiving adequate funding. The third thing that we agreed to was that because of the nature of the position, we would have an annual review process in terms of how the executive director is doing in the job. We have to sort of iron out. He readily agreed to an annual review process. We're going to have to hammer out the details, because there's all kinds of different ways to do an annual review process. My intention is to try to seek as much input in terms of arriving at some annual review process. So anyway, those are the 3 major points. If you review the act, basically the position is an exempt position, a government position. So all of the civil service protections that a regular employee might get are not present in this situation. So we are able to craft the agreement as set forth. So with that leads us to where we are today. And what I was going to do was to have Mr. DeFries introduce. He's in the waiting room in the Zoom. So I'm going to ask him to kind of point, if you could let him in, and then have him introduce himself to all of you, but also to those who might not know him. Okay, I don't see, there you are. Go ahead, Mr. DeFries.
I'm sorry. Can you repeat?
Yeah, I just want you to, if you could introduce yourself, tell people who you are, what your thoughts about, generally about your relationship with Mauna Kea. That would be helpful.
Sure. Are you witnessing a black box on your side of it?
Oh, we see you.
Okay. Hold on 1 second.
We can hear you and see you.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. For those that don't know me, my name is John DeFries, and was informed shortly after the February 8th board meeting, that the Board of Directors of the Mauna Kea Authority had authorized the board chair, John Komeiji, to enter discussions with me in negotiations on terms of employment, and that at a subsequent meeting today, special meeting, there would be an opportunity for public testimony and for the board to review and consider the terms of employment. My interest in Mauna Kea, like many of you, comes from being a resident of this island. In the way of background, I was born and raised in Waikiki, 2 blocks from the beach, a half block from the zoo. Some may be familiar with the Queen Kapiolani Hotel. Before that hotel was there, our home was on that street. My wife and I have been living in Kona for the last 32 years. And during that time, a lot of my work takes me to different islands within the state primarily. And the last 3 years, I've been commuting back and forth to Honolulu as the head of the Hawaii Tourism Authority. Those 3 years, in hindsight, are proving to be really valuable. First of all, my hat's off to the board members of this authority. I know how difficult it is to run an organization like this when you're staffed or even when you're understaffed. But when you have no staff, that challenge is compounded, and somehow you've been able to hold that together. The other thing I want to do is acknowledge all of the applicants that applied for this job. I don't know how many of you applied, and I don't know your identities, but the very fact that you took the step to apply would suggest that what we have in common is a concern and aloha for Mauna Kea. I also want to thank all of those that have submitted testimony, whether that testimony is in favor of my selection or in opposition. Having read through everything that was posted online, there's value in every one of those testimonies, and I would encourage everyone to take the time to go through it if you haven't done so already. Going back maybe 9-10 years, as Mauna Kea moved to the front pages of and the 30-meter telescope, each of us individually had to do some soul searching about what all of this meant. And I had some concerns back then from a development standpoint that TMT and its team, it's developing in Hawaii is tough. Doing it on a mountain like Mauna Kea is and the sacredness that is surrounding that is at a different level. And I expressed some concerns to the leadership of that organization going back to 2015. In 2017, a combination of things happened. I was in the midst of reviewing the comprehensive management plan, and in the preamble, the Ia Kanaka Ole Foundation establishes, in a very strong language, affirming the sacredness of Mauna Kea. And it also referenced statements by a gentleman by the name of Ed Stevens, who I knew as a kid and had not seen for a while. And Ed also had mana'o that was embodied in that preamble. The combination of that and the dream I had about my own family in their Hawaiian names compelled me to draft a memo to Kahukumana, the cultural advisors to the University of Hawaii and to the Mauna Kea Management Group. And in that, the title of that memo was Hawaiian Celestial Nomenclature. And what I attempted to assert then was that discoveries that are made astronomically off of Mauna Kea, there should be a policy, there should be a protocol, there should be a program that would name each of those discoveries in Hawaiian and in alignment with the Kumulipo. And that experts in that field should be contacted. And that program is now manifested into a program called Ahua He Inoa. And thanks to the efforts of Dr. Larry Kimura, that program continues to move forward. In 2019, the summer of 2019, the gathering at the Mauna Kea Access Road again impacted all of us and caused us again to rethink kind of positions that we had. And I perceive myself to be an advocate of modern astronomy. And I've been empathetic and at times supportive of the 30-meter telescope. But what that statement, the summer of 2019 and subsequent conversations, has caused me to understand that there's a polarity that exists on Mauna Kea, and it rightfully so. And it's by nature, historically, when we're in conflict or when there is that kind of polarization, to look, to recognize what a third or fourth point in the equation could be. And frankly, I saw that third point emerge first in the report of the Mauna Kea Working Group, Ilaho Keia, Mamana Avakea. I began to see kind of dimensions that were being introduced into the way we think about resource management and land management that I thought had the makings of becoming an important third point in the discussion. And then Act 255, signed in July of 22, reaffirmed that there is a different way of looking at that, and that this authority is charged with developing and creating a framework upon which astronomy would be conducted. When I add all those pieces up, and I made the decision to leave the Hawaii Tourism Authority at the end of my 3-year term, all of that contributed to my decision to become an applicant. And there's no way of me knowing if I'm the best candidate because I don't know the other applicants. But I thank the board for taking that step and giving me the opportunity to at least engage with the board chair and bringing us to this point. So, Chair Komeiji, I'll stop there and return it to you.
Oh, Mr. DeFries. We'll have opportunity of the board members to follow up and ask questions of you following the public testimony. So at this point, we're going to have members of the public that have signed up testify, and we'll start with the Zoom. But before we start, I wanted to let everybody know that there's been a lot of written testimony previously submitted. So I wanted to acknowledge all of the people that have both supported and not supported the retention of Mr. DeFries. So from a support standpoint, these are the individuals that submitted testimony: George Yamada, John Aeto, Gregory Ogan. I apologize if I mispronounce somebody's name. Susan Maddox, Governor John Waihe'e, Kuhio Lewis, Celeste Connors, Emma Keoho Kalole. Sorry. John Monahan, Nainoa Thompson, Rob Kildall, Kamanao Crab, Claude Onizuka, John Morgan, the Mauna Kea Observatories, and late testimony that was submitted last night was submitted by the Japanese Chamber of Commerce and Industry of Hawaii Island Chamber of Commerce, and Dr. Pua Kanahele. Those not supporting the appointment of Mr. DeFries are Todd Yamashita, Tamara Hayden, Jean Jewell, Jim and Chanel Caldera, Kalani Souza, Mata Ann Snell, Bob Douglas, Anna Hartman, Sylvia Dolena, Thomas Rupun, Deidre Roney, the organization Kahea, D. Green, C. Berghardt, Corey Harden, Janice Palma, Glennie, Jody Mercier, Patricia Ravara, Deborah Ward, Vanessa Ott, Regina Gregory, Shelley Munioka, and Larry Sinkin. So with that, those are the written submissions that we've already received. All of those submissions should be posted if anyone wants to look on the Mauna Kea Authority website. But with that, we're going to call on, I have a listing somewhere of individuals. Buena, can you let the first person in, please?
Yeah.
Sorry. All right, Bianca, I'm gonna kind of hold to what has been customary, 2 minutes for each individual to speak. So I know that you are representative of Kaya, so if you might, you've also submitted support for the board members. Kaya submitted written testimony also. So go ahead, Bianca.
Aloha, Chair, and good morning, members. And I will note the testimony link isn't working, so maybe they're switching it out or adding more things. So yes, I'm here for Kahea. We're a nonprofit. Since 2000, we've been working to protect Mauna Kea for almost that long. We initially opposed the creation of this authority for reasons including that it would be used to make plausible the sense that the state was moving towards Hawaiian community acceptance of the TMT. And hiring DeFries as your executive director will only make this sense more plausible. We're glad he walked back his statements about the TMT, but he did not say why, only that there is, he says, a way out of the polarization. But what he said before was that he also was trying to find a way out of the polarization, that he believes in the right of the Kia'i Mauna to protest, and he believes in the building of the TMT on Mauna Kea. But this is precisely the way the state wants to frame the TMT issue, as one in which people can say whatever they want about the TMT, but it'll be built anyway. So it shows they aren't listening, and neither, I'm sorry, is Mr. DeFries. When Mr. DeFries wrote that Mauna Kea hanai'd 13 telescopes, he also articulates a state agenda to not only seek acceptance of industrial astronomy on a sacred place, but to use the terms of culture and genealogy to do so. I know culture changes all the time, but when it's changed to fit a settler state agenda, that's colonial hegemony. I don't get to use that term a lot, but that is what this is. Finally, just Hokulia, that is a terrible project with an awful legacy of environmental damage and desecration. And we paid close attention to the dates. We know that he started with 1250 Oceanside in June 2001. That was about when litigation was moving towards settlement. The settlement phase, though, that was perhaps just as contentious and damaging for Hawaii communities. I talked to folks who are plaintiffs in that case, and there's still protests through 2015 at least. So this is not somebody I think that will be well fitted. He's good at a lot of things, I'm sure, but not well fitted for this position. So with all this due respect to you and Mr. DeFries, hiring him as your executive director will not assist in the work we need you to do for Mauna Kea. Thank you.
Bianca. Bueno, if you could let in whoever the next testifier is.
Next, we have Charles Flaherty.
Mr. Flaherty, are you there? Oh, there you are. Go ahead, Mr. Flaherty, whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much. Aloha.
Flaherty, are you there?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Hold on, we're getting some feedback somehow from somebody. We can hear you, but somehow we're getting feedback. Go ahead, Mr. Flaherty, whenever you're ready.
Okay. Aloha, Mr. Chair
Thank you very much.
and members of the board.
Aloha, Flaherty, are you there?
Yeah, I'm getting
Can you hear me?
feedback. I'm
Can you
getting
hear me?
feedback as well.
Sorry,
Hold
Mr.
on.
Flaherty, are you running the YouTube? I believe you may be running.
Ah,
the
that's what's going on.
Switching on your mic.
I'm not sure. Hold on, let me check.
Go ahead, Mr. Flaherty, whenever you're ready.
Okay.
No, I'm not running
Aloha,
YouTube.
Mr. Chair, thank you very much. And members on the board. Aloha, Flaherty, are you there? I'm getting feedback.
No, I am not.
Sure, hold on, let me check.
Right, you wanna try again?
Could you,
Would you try to, what if you mute the DOFA room? That,
I only just unmuted. It was muted when his feedback was happening, so that wasn't us.
okay. Mr. Flaherty, why don't you try again?
Aloha.
Could you, would you try to, what if you mute the DOFA room? That.
I only just unmuted. It was muted when his feedback was happening, so that wasn't us.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Flaherty, why don't you try again?
Aloha.
Okay, you need to.
Would you try to?
Okay, what you need to do is look at your browser windows and make sure that YouTube is not open.
Okay, I see that it did open up. Sorry about that. My apologies. Obviously I'm an older individual. Aloha, Mr. Chair and members of the Mauna Kea Stewardship and Oversight Authority. I'm testifying in opposition to the hiring of Mr. DeFries, Mr. John DeFries. I'm compelled to testify as a result of his listing the 2006 settlement of Kelly versus 1250 Oceanside Partners in his curriculum vitae. I was a plaintiff along with several other residents and Native Hawaiian legal Native Hawaiian organization, and I don't know why Mr. DeFries listed that settlement there. I just wanted to be clear that he was not responsible for the settlement. He didn't direct it or facilitate it. And the authority should not assume that Mr. DeFries' participation in the settlement negotiations anyway qualifies him to be executive director of the authority. I don't think he's the person to hire and assist the authority through the complex legal and political waters that lie ahead. as the authority moves forward with its legislative mandate. The most disturbing thing about the settlement was that when Mr. DeFries left, there were numerous provisions of the settlement that were not complete. Subsequent to Mr. DeFries' departure, I was taken on a tour of the project, 1250 project, to assess the progress of protection of cultural resources. At one location, we were taken to a battered plastic tarp laying on the ground next to a lava blister. When I asked what was under the tarp, I was told that it was Iwi Kapuna, and I was shocked to learn that this was only the most recent of many tarps covering the Iwi Kapuna because they had been laying there for years. The State Historic Preservation Division spent several years demanding 1250 complete the court-ordered actions and its burial treatment plan, orders and plans that 1250 did not complete under Mr. DeFries. I also would like to point out that Mr. DeFries' curriculum vitae lists his business as a project management and consulting, but the DCCA business registration states the purpose to be real estate development and consultation. The bottom line is that this authority will be stewarding and overseeing amongst the most, if not the most sacred Vahipana in a very fraught and controversial situation, one that now has global attention. I think that Mr. DeFries' hiring would result in additional controversy and mistrust, and so that I ask that the authority vote in opposition to approval of hiring Mr. DeFries with respect. And I regret that I have to make this testimony, but I feel compelled to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Flaherty. Thank you for sharing your Manal. If we could point out, I'm not sure if we have other people on Zoom that want to testify.
We have one more. It's Shelly Muneoka.
Okay, thank you. Hello, Ms. Munioka, proceed when you're ready with your 2 minutes. Thank you.
Aloha. Aloha, my kako. My name is Shelly Monioka. I'm also here to testify in opposition to Mr. DeFries' hiring. I've been working towards the protection of Mauna Kea for going on 13 years now. As Mr. DeFries mentioned himself, this body came out of a legislative working group that produced a document called Hela Ho Keia Mauna Wa Kea. His hiring, however, does not represent a new day as something different or something new, which is what this body has been touted as. He's a familiar face in real estate development and tourism circles and is welcomed by those who support those industries. But his hiring will be counterproductive as he does not have credibility and support in the broader community. The rift between those two groups who hold different values and visions for Hawaii's future is the rift that this body is supposedly trying to bridge. I was sickened to read on his resume cultural sites and burial sites protection, which is presumably a reference to his time with the luxury development at Hokuli'a that disturbed over 70 sets of iwi kupuna. He helped to construct a 6-foot wall around a pu'u to quote unquote protect it, while a 1,500-acre development and golf course went up around it. It's tone deaf and naive to consider this a win. Our burials in wahi kupuna like Mauna Kea deserve to exist without the threat of encroachment looming over them. The example that Mr. DeFries shared this morning is the Ahua Hei Noa program that gives Hawaiian names to astronomical discoveries on Mauna Kea as a prime example of an insufficient mitigation that does not address the harm of an industrialized summit with flattened pu'u. When I looked into Mr. DeFries' history and experience, I found a person who's willing to sit at the head of controversial projects that divide our communities and will pay apologetic lip service, but plow forward anyway. And I don't mean that as a compliment. Someone who doesn't respect a community's no should not be at the helm of the decisions for Mauna Kea, a sacred mountain who's loved by so many. The leader of this organization shouldn't be someone practiced at taking karmic hits of splitting communities and even families in the service of business as usual. And his hiring itself has recreated this well-worn fissure, as there are well-respected kanaka on both sides of this decision. I don't believe it's too much for our community to hope for a leader who will not compromise on the safety and protection of Mauna Kea. And yet, as we've already heard, Mr. DeFries is on record saying that he believes Mauna Kea has embraced modern astronomy and the construction of TMT. Uncompromising and uncompromised is what we should be striving for. This is my hope for a leader of this authority. And I ask you to please reconsider the hiring of Mr. DeFries. Mahalo.
Thank you, Ms. Monioka. That, Buena, we don't have anybody else online, right?
That is it for the Zoom testimonies. The rest are here in person.
Okay, if you could, I don't know how we,
Okay, Corey, would you come and sit up here for your testimony?
I believe this is Corey Harden,
Yes.
right?
Can you folks hear me okay?
Yes,
Yes, first of all, thank you folks for your service on the board. I do ask that you vote no on this nomination.
Do you know?
As you know, Monica, I can't,
No, just don't have to do anything, but they can see you.
oh, I'm sorry. Mauna Kea is a sacred site, as you know, to many people. It's a cultural site, a source of inspiration for many more. And it's renowned throughout Polynesia for centuries. It's home to endangered and endemic species, and also the world's best astronomy site, putting it at the center of the struggle between conflicting visions for Hawaii. Unfortunately, Mr. DeFries' work background relates to none of this. He has built hotels and resorts, developed residential projects with resort level perks, operated tour companies and resorts, and marketed hotels and television sports. He's missing the work background that a director of this board should have, cultural concerns, natural resources, science, and history. As you know, he was CEO of 1250 Oceanside Partners, and they were shut down by a judge for building a high-end residential subdivision on agriculture land. And the community was also appalled, as others have said, at the desecration of burials and damage to historic trails. Also, twice large amounts of soil ran off the site into the ocean, into Class AA waters, impacting corals. And community members say not all of the promised erosion measures were put into place. DeFries has said he supports the TMT despite the irreversible cultural and environmental damage it would inflict and the tremendous community opposition. TMT bankrolled Friends of the Future, where Mr. DeFries was a board member, and Friends of the Future managed the Envision Mauna Kea initiative. I attended one of their sessions and felt it was slanted against protection for Mauna Kea. So I unfortunately don't feel that Mr. DeFries will protect Mauna Kea, so I urge you to vote no. Mahalo.
thank you, Ms. Harden. We appreciate your comments. There are others in the room that would like to testify. If you would come forward.
Next, we have Deborah Ward.
Okay. Thank you. Proceed, Ms. Ford. Thank you.
Thank you. Aloha kakahiaka, and thank you all to the board for the efforts you've been making to address Mauna Kea issues and to come to some solutions. However, I am urging you to reconsider the position of Mr. DeFries as executive director for several reasons. As Corey outlined just now, he was part of Oceanside 1250, which is responsible for desecration of burials and terrible decision to store bones under tarps and so forth, and in garages and storage containers. Iwi Kupuna deserve respect, and this was not respectful. There was a famous Alaloa Trail that was it was taken apart and realigned so that golf courses could be put in place. There were terrible pollution discharges due to the fact that, as the Department of Health noted, the best management practices were not followed as they were stated in an agreement. And so I have to ask the selection committee that endorsed this nomination if they were aware of these serious issues, because Mr. DeFries has been part of this company and is as much responsible as in a leadership position for all of these damaging issues that really have torn our community apart. I wonder if the selection committee actually believes that flouting state and county laws is inconsequential, because it's not. Does that indicate that we can expect more of the same kind of behavior when it comes to addressing further industrial development in a treasured and vulnerable landscape? Given that the company that Mr. DeFries has filed for bankruptcy, how has the selection committee considered the fiduciary responsibilities of the MKSOA and the utilization of state funds authorized by the legislature? This is a concern. Mr. DeFries claims that he is part of Envision Mauna Kea, but I know from personal conversations that many people were excluded from that discussion of Envision Mauna Kea, even though they volunteered to join. And the report that came out was slanted toward the people that supported development of further astronomy facilities on the Summit region. Does the selection committee believe that massive community opposition to the 30-meter telescope can be greenwashed through a manufactured mirage of consent? The whole idea that Hawaiians have denied the telescopes, it gives indication that Mr. DeFries believes that he can, by stating consent, manufacture consent. And then what relationship does Mr. DeFries have with Mr. Gordon Moore? He's pictured in a PowerPoint presentation as standing next to Gordon Moore as a kupuna titan of innovation. Maybe Mr. DeFries would like to be a titan of innovation, but this is not the way to do it. What relationship does the nominee have to the university's collaboration with the military to use telescopes on the Mauna? These answers need to be discussed in public forum, and until they are, I request that the selection be reconsidered and deferred at this time. Thank you very much. And I love all of you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the room that wanted to testify?
Right. Next, we have Lanny Sinkin.
Hey. Go ahead, Mr. Sinkin. Thank you.
Thank you, and good morning to the board. There's no question that the controversy surrounding the historical mismanagement of Mauna Kea is one of the most divisive issues facing our community. The most recent manifestation of that mismanagement is the proposed 30-meter telescope. The most recent legislative response to this Mauna issue led to the creation of the Mauna Kea Stewardship and Oversight Authority. One of the first acts of that authority is its selection and confirmation of an executive director. That selection should have been guided by criteria that acknowledged the seriousness of the controversy. The process of selection should have been transparent. Public participation in the selection process should have been encouraged and facilitated. The executive director selected should have been someone whose objectivity and neutrality were unquestionable. The executive director should have been of the highest integrity. Unfortunately, these basic requirements to ensure the selection of an executive director with broad public support did not guide the selection of John DeFries to be the executive director. The most contentious issue is the 30-meter telescope. Mr. DeFries is a supporter of constructing this newest telescope. For the MKSOA to choose an advocate for this telescope as executive director is clear evidence of a predetermined bias on the part of MKSOA. That choice is a slap in the face to the thousands of people who gathered to defend the Mauna from desecration. The absence of even the pretense of objectivity is confirmed by the selection process. The names of possible candidates were never released. Most discussion of selection took place behind closed doors in executive session. Minimal advance notice of the choice left little time for the public to research Mr. DeFries. Mr. DeFries' relevant professional history raises other red flags that should have been disqualifying. He was president of 1250 Oceanside Partners, a failed development that polluted Kealakekua Bay and ended in bankruptcy. A judge found that 1250 Oceanside Partners circumvented state land use laws. The choice of Mr. DeFries means that MKOSA is a captured agency prepared to make decisions that promote private interests rather than the public good. The MKOSA should engage in a true search for the most qualified candidate that involves the public with a particular focus on meeting the expectations of the Hawaiian community. I also just want to take note that I believe some people got an early notice of this meeting, where people were sending in testimony before the 6 days had begun. And I'm not sure why that happened, but it certainly shouldn't happen again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Simkin. Anyone else testifying?
We have one more, Millicent Cummings. Millicent?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you to all the people that have given testimony. I think the last person to give testimony just now, if you were to just take one testimony only and try to really examine the details of therein, you would have enough grounds to not move forward in the employment of this gentleman. In my opinion, I can say this to just make a 1-minute summary. Any discussion on the development of Mauna Kea is nonsensical, because industrial astronomy on a sacred site is nothing shy of a neo-colonial land grab that has in the past, does now, and will in the future be destructive, insulting, unnecessary, and offensive, based on Mr. Freese's track record and glaring conflicts of interest, which are clearly not being taken into account in considering his employment for this position. It would be negligent, willfully negligent, and only further the wedge that divides both the conversation and the parties involved, running essentially contrary to the mission of MKSOA or anyone else to bridge this divide in any way, shape, or form. So the digestion of year after year of these insulting and yet revealing attempts to do something that should never be done is as tiring as it is nonsensical and insulting. And I personally, as a Kia'i, can only say kukia'i maunu again and again and again. Aloha aina.
Oh, thank you. So that would conclude Puaina, those wishing to give testimony.
No further testimony.
All right. So at this point, I would open it up to the authority board members to ask whatever questions you think is appropriate of Mr. DeFries. Illinois, Wong Wilson. You're on mute somehow.
Okay, now can you hear me?
No.
Just a second.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah,
Okay,
you're not gonna hear her.
okay, mahalo. Well, first of all, I do want to thank everybody who testified, took the time to come today, whether it was on Zoom or here in the room, to testify, because that's a very important process. And we're listening very closely to everything that everyone says, both in support and in opposition of Mr. DeFries. But I wanted to just ask a couple of questions of John DeFries. And the first is, if I'm allowed to do this, ask you, John, to respond specifically to the 1250 Oceanside remarks that were made about your tenure there and treatment of Ibi Kupuna and the cultural resources from that space. And realize that, you know, I don't know, Chair, if there's a time limit for response, but I wanted to hear anything that you might have to say about that in response.
Thank you for the question. And first of all, thank you to all those that came to testify. My role at Oceanside started in September of 2000 when I was brought in as a consultant. In 48 hours, I had heard from 3 different people encouraging me to meet with the ownership of the project, and I responded. And one of them was a communications person, the other one was Sam Choi, actually, and the third was Herb Connier. And I took it seriously. It was the fact that it all happened in a compressed time frame. Met with the ownership, and I decided, after spending a month investigating the project, that I would engage as a consultant. That started, the lawsuit was filed in December of that year. The president of the company in January announced that he would be leaving in the month of June. In February, my maternal grandmother passed away of 2001. And my cousins here in Kona encouraged me to look at her files. And what was helpful about that is I was able to identify the burial place of her mother, my maternal great-grandmother. And it turned out to be on the lands there at Hokulea. And when I made that discovery in early March of 2001, I became intent on becoming the next president of the company. At that point, the company was already 5 months into the litigation. I knew that this would be a difficult situation to manage. Convened a family meeting on the site, about 40 of them. My mother at the time was still with us. And went over the options and what this meant. And in the end, the family unanimously supported the pursuit of this role. And eventually I was appointed in June of 2001 as the acting president, and 6 months later as the full-time president. So at that point, regardless of whether I came in after the lawsuit, I become responsible for everything that has gone right and has gone wrong. It was a 5.5-year lawsuit, very difficult. It was good to see Chuck Flaherty. I haven't seen him. He was one of 5 plaintiffs. But having your own great-grandmother there was a life-changing event and imposed certain standards on conduct that are just natural. Anything we did relative to Ibi Kupuna was done with lineal descendants involved, as well as Kupuna at that time. Auntie Lily Kong was a lead elder and guided us through much of this. But I take full responsibility for everything we did there. Now, did we make mistakes? Yeah, no question. But at the same time, I stand today in full responsibility of any action we took or did not take. And And I just call on us to resist the temptation of retrying the case. The fact is that the plaintiffs and their attorneys came to a settlement agreement. Mr. Flaherty is incorrect to say that I was not involved in it. But again, there's very little use in going back to replay the settlement or the case, other than the project has moved forward. I will tell you that once we settled in April of 2006, in the midst of remobilizing the project, in late 2007, the global financial collapse happened, right? Lehman Brothers and everything in between. The bank that held a note on that project no longer exists in London. And so we were able to sustain enough of the project as it went through foreclosure to make sure that the whole project did not implode and that it would one day be able to move forward. And it is moving forward under new ownership. But it isn't only what we did there, but why we did it. And I know that folks who don't know me can have an account of what I did in court records, in media, in secondhand information. What you can't understand until we get to know one another is why I'm compelled to do things. And I did not take that job with blinders on. I knew it would be difficult, but I also saw it as an opportunity to insert Hawaiian values and Hawaiian leadership at a critical time. I don't expect everybody to celebrate this, but I'm actually proud of what we accomplished there. I'll leave it at that. No.
Can I hear you? No, you're muted.
Okay, one more question, Chair, if I may. What we're talking about in many conversations today from our testifiers is the TMT project. And first, let me just say that the development of Mauna Kea Stewardship and Oversight Authority is in such infancy right now that we have not even uttered those words in any of our official meetings. But this is my question of you. If you were to have this position and the board takes a position that is not aligned with your personal feelings or your personal mana'o about a project or about any of the actions that need to be considered, how would you conduct yourself in carrying out the work of the board?
I'm sorry I wasn't clear up front in the opening remarks. The background I gave you about my feelings about modern astronomy, about TMT, ultimately recognizing that there was a polarization, my interest in finding a third point, or third or fourth perspective or position on it, and recognizing that the authority and in the law, Act 255, I recognized that there was a third way to do it, right? Which is to have a board develop the framework under which any of that activity would or would not move forward. At the point in time where I decided to apply to become the executive director, my personal positions are released. And my responsibility is now focused on the mana'o of the 12. I have complete confidence that the 12 minds, as diverse as they are, will actually result in an outcome or a direction that is far more powerful than anything I could do or any single individual. So specifically to your question, I have no position on this, and I'm prepared to serve the 12-member board.
One more question I have, can you unmute me? One more last question, Chair. You made a statement in your introduction about your understanding of Mauna Kea, MKSOA and its relationship to promoting astronomy. And I'm sorry to misquote you, but related to astronomy. And so I just want to also make a statement that for me, the value of MKSOA is that the emphasis has been shifted away from this polarizing issue of astronomy on the Mauna and more toward the fact that we are obligated to protect Mauna Kea for future generations, to take care of Mauna Kea in all its dimensions, and that as much emphasis, if not more, should be placed on the environment, protection of the species up there, on education and all the other components that are equally, if not more important than the presence of astronomical facilities. Recognizing, of course, that Act 255 does state that astronomy shall continue. So we have that we're compelled to comply with as a board. But so I just want to make sure that you're very clear about the mission of this authority and the framework that we have to move forward in.
No, I fully concur, and I go back to the working group's report and how important that work is, and ultimately Act 255. But I fully concur with the description and the emphasis that you placed on the authority's mission.
Mahalo. Other questions, other members? Come on up.
Velina mai ke lohi ka aina ya kako pakahia pau. Aloha everyone. Thanks for being here on a Thursday. I read all of the written testimonies, even the ones that came in this morning, and deeply mahalo people making time to come and testify in person. I know Mauna Kea deserves all of our presence and our mana and our mana'o, and many of us have been giving that for many years. This is the testimonies really do highlight some of the complexities. I mean, we have esteemed Kia'i, Auntie Pua and others, supporting you, John, and we have Kia'i and others also saying, this isn't a choice that will bring a new day, and some of the previous history and work that you've done, people have called into question. I aloha you. None of this is personal, so please understand that. I'm just trying to ask questions that this board will be faced with, in the future, and knowing the executive directors is going to have to. This is such a hard job. We've inherited mismanagement, and in my mana'o poor decision making, for over 50 years, and though all of us weren't here making those decisions, we've inherited that, and we're trying to ho'opono and ho'opololei. We're being challenged, the constitutionality of our authority. There's lots to juggle. So a lot of the questions are around, your support of TMT and some of that past efforts, John. And you and I weren't, and actually many of us on this board weren't on the same side on that particular issue. But I want to get your thoughts on something I think that's even as critical and as important is during that period, what was the hardest thing for me was the divisiveness that became of our community, and this particular argument that this was an argument of culture versus science. We had letters from wealthy people in our community calling us primitive, saying we're taking us back into the past. Many of us are experts in education, in science and advancement and sustainability. And those were not the issues that we were opposed on dealing with Mauna Kea and TMT. So it was really hard for me to hear those things, John, in circles. And it's so much so that it I had to address it. And I'm just wondering, looking back on that now, you must have heard some of those arguments. How you as a leader, how are we going to reconcile this? And how are people going to trust you to do that, John?
You know, back in 2007, 2008, I sat through the first class of Papaku Makavalo that the Edith Kanakaole Foundation, together with Kamehameha Schools at the time, were developing. And I left that session with an understanding of, a better understanding of how scientific our ancestors were. And that science could be conducted in the natural system and not be invasive, right? And so I left the room that day. It happened to be taking place at Kehoe Beach Hotel. I left the room that day, and the thought that came to mind is, at what point do those principles, does that awareness, does that consciousness become embedded in land use management, land use policy, and this is like early 2008. And that's what resonated for me when I read Hilahu Keia, the working group's report, is I started to see all these years later, those principles come together and emerge, right, as an operating framework for this body, which is very unusual as a state agency, but nonetheless, that was part of the attraction. So over the years, I just become more, I have been in those conversations. I have, in every effort or every engagement with somebody who's advocating that culture and science debate, to get them to understand that you cannot have more than 400 names for rain and more than 400 names for clouds and more than 300 names for rain, and have no value in a time when climate science is upon us in the challenges that we have to deal with. And so, as I said, part of the attraction to this is the opportunity to create a new paradigm built around the principles that have been set forth in the working group's report and the way it's been framed in Act 255. To your earlier point about people on one side, good people on one side in opposition of my selection, and on the other side, good people advocating for my selection, right? The truth is they're both right, okay? And the theme of those, or a characteristic of those that oppose my selection is related to the fact that we don't know one another. And I hope to have the opportunity to engage face-to-face directly, especially with those in opposition. the ones who have endorsed my selection have known me for 20, 30, 55 years, right? And so I understand that, and I understand and I value that, right? But the reality is that they're both right. And the concerns and the qualities that they question or they endorse, as we sit here today, are all right. Okay, and nothing other than direct engagement with one another is going to remedy that. 20, 25, 30 years ago, if I sat through this morning's testimonies, I would be filled with resentment and emotionally upset, right? I'm not, because we cannot take that kind of feeling and accomplish the mission that we have in front of us as an authority. And so I embraced everything I heard today. I've arrived at this moment in time, recognizing that my learning curve is vertical. We live in a time in our islands, notwithstanding just Mauna Kea, where our learning curves are vertical and there's so much to learn and consume. So, Member Beamer, I hope that addresses your question.
Yeah, no, mahalo, John. I appreciate that, and that aloha he alo is important. Yeah, and I think you're coming in with significant experience from Hawaii Tourism Authority, and I appreciate the work that you did in trying to reframe and redirect towards Malama and thinking about regenerative tourism and these issues. So I know that you understand big structures and the ledge and politics, which will be important for this. Yeah, and I think you had mentioned how difficult it is to start an organization from the beginning. We had literally had zero staff. And Chair Komije, Vice Chair Moinai Wong Wilson, and others have done tremendous work to get us here. It's not certain if what will become of this entity. There's a lot of distrust. The community has every right, to be skeptical. And we're volunteering our time, taking time away from our families and regular jobs to try to do something better for Mauna Kea. And I just want to articulate that taking on this position, regardless of previous roles, requires, a different way of doing things. Not about culture versus science. It's about Mauna Wakea and the future of the Mauna. And there should never be a time in the history of Hawaii where we sit back and allow us to be called primitive because we're trying to care for our mountain. I would refute that as long as I live. And I expect the leader of this to be able to negotiate that and speak the truth to power on these kinds of issues, John. So
I appreciate that, because your mana'o makes me recall that I was probably in my late 20s, and an executive, after hearing a presentation of mine, came up to congratulate me and then said, "Don't ever forget that people are going to be more comfortable seeing you Hawaiians carry an ukulele case than a briefcase." Right? So we've all kind of grown through that web, right? And I knew in that moment, and I was probably 28 years old, that was meant to be a gift. That I'd never forget that this bias is inherent, right? And so, as my resume says, I did not earn a college degree. Tourism for me became the college. If you think of tourism as a papaya, when you cut the papaya in half, you open it up, you get all these individual black seeds, right? In tourism, all those black seeds are architecture, IT, restaurant operations, accounting, right? They're all, and so it became a school that I could go to and did go to become multidisciplinary, right? And fundamentally challenge that premise that, I mean, I don't mind carrying an ukulele case. I wish I could play it, but that statement has stuck with me, obviously, and continues to, you know, that kind of stuff continues to motivate me. And part of my attraction to applying for this role is the complexity.
Yeah, mahalo nui, John. Thank you. I'm good, Chair. I don't know if others have questions.
Okay, wow, other questions? Ben, Kudo.
Hi, John. I had a few questions for you. How do you perceive, excuse me? Okay. How do you perceive or characterize your role and responsibility as the executive director and the role and responsibility of the board?
I see the board in its policymaking role, which typically a board, and those policies would then govern the actions that we take. So operationally, I would be charged, the team would be charged with moving forward in concert with the policies. I haven't, what I am looking forward to is spending individual time with each of you to get to understand what it is that compelled you to become a board member, right? Because, and benefit from that. So at the outset, I'm willing to kind of understand beyond just policymaking, what ideas and perspectives you have in this. But historically, the role between executive staff and the board would be one being policy driven, the other one being responsible for operating what would be an agreed upon operations plan or management plan.
In other words, implementation of the policy.
Correct.
So now the testimony this morning and others that were submitted raise your personal position on TMT as an issue. Do you believe that your role as an advocate for TMT is to advocate that to the board?
No, I don't. If I understood your wording correctly, my role is not as an advocate of TMT. And when I decided to apply for this role, what I was becoming an advocate of was Act 255. And astronomy is one section of that, as was pointed out by Noi earlier. But I don't see my role at all as an advocate of TMT. That's not the function of the authority.
So going back to the first question, then the role of the board will be to decide its position on TMT and your role is to carry out whatever that decision may be.
Correct.
So let me switch to the other issue that was raised this morning with regard to your alleged mistreatment of Native Hawaiian cultural artifacts and iwi at Hokulea. What is your position or feeling about the treatment of cultural artifacts and iwi and other significant Native Hawaiian issues that affect the Mauna
That affect the Mauna?
or are located on the Mauna?
What are my, they need to be treated, the artifacts and anything culturally related need to be treated with the utmost respect. It needs to be our efforts, in addition to whatever the board policy is, would be guided to by experts in that particular field, whether it involves iwi kupuna or artifacts. But if I understand the wording to your question correctly, they deserve the highest level of honor and respect that we can give to that. And the board will foster a policy about it. The state has laws about it. But also we have lineal descendants to the mountain that will have strong feelings about that as well. I see my function as being able to be open to all that guidance and then return to the board and return to the community with recommended steps that we take.
So your perception is that you would gather the information, seek input, get expert advice on it, and bring that to the board for its opinion as to which direction should or action should be taken or not taken.
That would be accurate.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, John. That's all I
Thank
have.
you.
Other questions? Anyone? Manakilo.
Mahalo, John, for stepping up to the plate. That's a big thing. I always want to recognize too that this is the formation of this new authority, a new office, is something that's apparently even out of practice for the state of Hawaii itself, and so it's a big endeavor that we're learning about of the lack of know-how of actually making this process happen, which is drug it out, and why it's essential that we find someone who is key in helping us actually get this this office movement stood up. And then I just have a couple of questions, and one of them too, as I'm sure, as it was stated, it goes back to the one of the concerns raised with Hokulea. I just wanted to understand, one, to ask your opinion if a statement was true or not. But in the treatment of iwi kupuna under a plastic tarp, just if you were aware of that, and just your knowledge of that, how long was iwi in such a position? And if you were a part of remedying that, what was your process, or if you were involved in that, of finding out, or how did they get there? How long were they there? What was the process to care for them?
You know, if I understood Mr. Flaherty's description of it, that issue with the tarp was one that took place after I left. But having said that, it was a practice when iwi was found to leave it in place, cover it with a tarp to protect it until at such time an agent from SHPD arrived, right? So, and then once that a determination was made by the agent, then the appropriate action would be taken. And during the time I was there, we had set up a facility where the EV, once we were given permission to move, would be temporarily stored. Okay. But I don't recall prolonged. There'd be no reason to prolong the EV to be left there unless there was an uncertainty expressed by DLNR about how to proceed with that. But that particular issue that he raised today is not familiar to me. And during, I'm not suggesting that that EV wasn't found when I was there, but I think if I understood him correctly, that matter took place after I'd already departed, which would have been about April 2012, and he had returned to the project site.
Model for that clarification. My next question is, as it's concerned, one of the concerns, of course, that's been brought up is in some of your background being predominantly in tourism or development and such. Mauna Kea being conservation land, and perhaps so something's pointed out maybe a lack of experience working in this type of capacity with conservation. And for myself as a Kanaka and also representing the cultural role here, for me, conservation is probably the one thing that actually falls in line with our own cultural practices with the Mauna, that it was to be held in the highest record of conservation, which in many ways, conservation should lift it out even higher than the average whim of humanity. And that the land is the care and well-being of conservation zones and lands is superior. And some would state that it's a bit of an anomaly that there is a process to allow large-scale developments within such spaces. So my question to you is, in knowing that background, or knowing kind of the idea of that this is conservation lands, and for all the reasons it's under conservation, because of its high alpine desert ecosystem, the fragility of that environment, native species, cultural sites, and all of this, being someone that has a background in development, you can understand where the community could be very uncomfortable with this. But in understanding that, I just want to kind of ask your thought of, if you were to look at this, erase the idea of it being astronomy, being any type of large-scale developments in conservation lands, where you're looking at Mauna Kea, but consider if we're down Makai, if we're down in a forest region, or such as that. Would your thoughts on it, on feeling something or seeing something about large-scale constructions being pushed into conservation zones?
Going back to when I first read the working group's report and ultimately Act 255, which tries to frame it, the act itself doesn't contain the depth that it has, that the report has. I think to your point, and you brought this up in the interview process about the need to focus on a conservation plan that is comprehensive for the Mauna. For every reason that you pointed out. I don't know if you've had the chance. Late last night, I got a copy of a letter from Antipua Kanahele that goes to great lengths talking about the strata and the different levels on the mountain and the kind of intensity. I did have a chance to talk to her about it, but I think you'll resonate with that. But essentially, there is no more important work to do on the Mauna than maximizing the conservation efforts in that zone. And the fact that the Act puts whatever astronomy is going to be defined by this board going forward. But so going back to the earlier conversation with Ben about policy, you've been a strong advocate for conservation from day one. You were always years ahead of yourself in that respect, but ultimately you're going to be able to define how it is you want the staff to move forward in prioritizing conservation efforts. And in many respects, we're starting from square one on that.
Kaliwa. Larkili sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, Kaliwa, sorry.
Yeah, aloha, John.
Aloha.
I haven't had too much time to talk with you, and but in reading all the testimony, one of the things that I just kind of want to get to that point, not belabor it, but to me, I'm not too worried about the opinions you hold in accordance to the decisions we have to make. I think there's a little bit of that trust in the impartiality of the information that will come to us as a board. I've been on another commission where sometimes is the transmission of information is difficult because of impartiality. So I would say that that's one of the concerns in the work and in the position that I'll carry. And I'm gonna have to deal with that in the decisions that we have to make today, the decision that we have to make today. What I wanted to ask you, aside from that, was it's really about like our efficacy as an authority, our legitimacy is the way has a big thing, a big component is the optic. And so I kind of want you to talk about the optic that and the picture that seems to be being painted about potentially having you work with us as it pertains to some of the things that folks have said about the past or opinions that you carry, because I just think like, if not, would it benefit our authority to have someone with your capacity, which is not what I'm questioning. I know you have high capacity, but would it benefit our work as a hui, because the optic is a part of how we're seeing, and then our value to our community. And I kind of want you to sell the car to me, tell me why this optic of having you as our ED would be beneficial to us versus not having somebody with some of the quote unquote what I would think some of the community members perceive as baggage. Mahalo.
Yeah, thank you for the question, by the way. When I look for, like, let's take the 1250 Oceanside, there've been several references to that. The Hawaii Tourism Authority is another example, and I have a lot of experience and a lot of confidence in being able to bring people with disparate and divergent perspectives together. And much of that over time has refined itself because I'm at the point in my life where I don't have to be right. And remaining open and subordinating your perspective and your agenda to become a better listener, and to be able to translate. I think in the interview, I used the analogy of the imagery I had of the 12 board members as being sitting in a circle as a star compass, that each of you has a coordinate or a range of coordinates that you excel in, from which I have confidence that I would be able to translate in a meaningful way. But at each one of those steps, bringing people together under tough circumstances has been a craft that has been honed. including HTA. If the economy had not collapsed in the summer of 2020, I would have never applied for HTA. It was disruptive to my life in Kona to have to commute. The minute I started to internalize that the economy did collapse, tourism was shut down, or people were getting hurt. Granted, there were federal subsidies, but that wasn't going to go on forever. That prompted me to take that action. And frankly, people question why I would step into that. But I knew at that point, the one thing I knew was that if you were a leader in our state, a leader in our communities, you were on the front line when COVID broke out. And that formation was very unique, and that formation could become really important in guiding the recovery. And I saw tourism. I didn't take that role on because of tourism. I took it on because our home was hurt and our people were hurt. And I understood the mechanisms in tourism to value that as an instrument in the recovery, okay? So in the end, you've got to be able to pull a lot of people with different feelings under high stress levels together. And, you know, I see that as an important part of the work here with this authority. And again, that's part of the attraction to it is the complexity and is the ability to move it from polarization into collaboration, knowing full well that that kind of work moves precisely at the speed of trust, right? In the absence of trust, we make no progress on it. And that is my monotony. I feel called to this moment, otherwise I wouldn't be wasting your time and anybody's time on it. This is urgent, and there's an opportunity here that is really kind of unprecedented. And it's because that polarity creates this revolution, this rotation that that can be extremely constructive and productive.
Mahalo nui.
Other questions? Ryan?
Model. So my question is about operational concerns in the short term. So when someone comes in to apply for these types of positions, you know, to be the head of an agency, that person has typically thought of a plan of action on what they would do when they get into a position, whether it be first 100 days or so. And for this authority, since we're so new and there are so many people watching and expecting results to have occurred yesterday, can you please articulate, and it's for the board's benefit and for the public's benefit, on what your immediate plans are to stand up this authority and get results?
Let me just focus on the first 2 weeks there. It's going to be important, and I've conveyed this to Chair Komeiji. It's going to be extremely important for me to have face-to-face time with each of you on the board and to come out of that experience with some initial recommendations to make. There are also candidates. You've got 5 authorized positions. And it's going to be essential that priority be placed on identifying candidates and getting into a review and hiring process, because the weight that you're carrying now is going to be somewhat supported by the arrival of the executive director. But even that additional person that is going to need at least, if not all 5 positions, at least the first 2, in addition to Puaena being there. And out of that 2-week experience, I would be able to discern what the priority should be over the following 90 days and come back to you with that recommendation. on it. I will tell you that the Center for Mauna Kea Center of Stewardship for Mauna Kea is anxious and has been very professional in reaching out. But before going there, there's some internal onboarding that has to be completed so that I have a semblance of where the board is. And I know there are multiple pigs here that have been advancing some of the work. And internally, I just need the time to absorb that and translate that into how my first 100 days will be spent and communicate that to you like 2 weeks in.
And I expect that a lot of the work that the community interaction groups are taking on will probably be, a big part of your responsibility and the staff's responsibility. So thank you.
I don't want to overplay the tourism piece, but part of the experience is when you develop a hotel and you open it, one day you're a construction site, the next day you're a hotel. In between, you got to get the first 200 people hired, right? And so that kind of experience of being able to do that. Now, in the private sector, we've got resources and methods that we can use that we cannot in state government completely. But frankly, that transition of going from 0 employees to 200 to 400, that experience will be helpful to me.
Other questions? If not, I guess we've come to the point where if someone feels to make a motion one way or the other, I look for a motion and a second so that we can move on. And part of this discussion is going to be asking all of you as we before we vote what your feelings are, so that we can be one of the questions is developing trust and transparency, right? So how we go about that. But before we do that, I would entertain a motion to approve the hiring of John DeFries pursuant to the agreement that I set forth earlier in this meeting.
I move.
Okay. Second by no, you're muted, but I take that as a second. Okay, so I'm not sure exactly how we do this because maybe we can ask people who feel comfortable to share what your thoughts are, and then we can have the vote as opposed to doing the vote and then having people explain later. Yeah, because we may benefit from the sharing of people's thoughts about where we're going. So I don't know if anyone wants to volunteer to go first.
I will. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, mahalo.
No, Chair, can we take a bathroom break, like 2 minutes?
Okay.
We're like I've been drinking a lot of water here. 2 minutes.
Everybody had a 2-minute break.
Thank you. Okay.
Wow.
Is that bathroom model here? Good idea. Just.
So if everyone can turn on the camera when they're back, it would be helpful so that we know that we can start. Thank you. Hey, Doug, you okay? We can start.
Oh, okay, I was gonna start. So, you know, it's a challenge to know that there are so many of our community and our Kia'i that are not in favor of this appointment. But I think for us as board members, we really have to look at the entire pie or the whole picture and see what we need as an authority right now. So I think the fact that John comes with other attributes and skill in administrative management and networks that he comes with, and his ability to work with state government and have an understanding of state government and its processes, which is an animal all of its own, as well as with the legislative processes, really key to where we need right now. And you know, he made a reference to opening a hotel versus running a mature resort operation, and it is so true. Right now we are in the building mode and we need particular skills, and I think I think that John pretty much comes with those skills. The other thing that I think brings me comfort is this is an exempt position. It's an at-will hire, which means that if we as an authority decide that this relationship doesn't work, we have the ability to end it. You know, we're not obligated to a particular period of contract that we have to live with until the contract expires. And John, on the other hand, has that same authority or same right to decide that this is not a fit for him, and he can then depart if that were the case. So, you know, given those things, I think those are important for me for making the decision.
Paul, I think you raised your hand, please.
Yeah, you know, in many ways, I think, you know, John's career, as I've known him for a long time, I've kind of like tried to emulate some of the hospitality career and all of that stuff. You know, you work your way up to a certain point, and then you get to this point where, like, when I got to Keho Beach as the general manager, I started thinking in 2008 more about what we could do for the community as well, right? And I think John has that same mentality, you know, moving up into into a higher level opportunities gives you opportunity to reach more people in the community and help them. Because I've always, you know, I learned from other people and John as well, is that, you know, if your community is not healthy, your business is not going to be healthy, right? And so I feel really strongly about John's, you know, his inner workings, and everything is focused on culture and his family, and, you know, and Hawaiian family, the genealogy, and I truly feel without fear, because, well, John has told you today, you know, it's, we're not doing, the thing about the TMT is that the executive director doesn't control what happens for the TNT. It's us. It's the 12 board members that control everything, right? We're the ones that vote, and the executive director executes our mission. So we just need somebody that is willing to work with us, and they can't find anybody else better than John to be the person right now, because I followed him for so many years, and he's been, he's one of my role models, to be honest with you. So, thank you.
Oh, well. Others. Right.
Well, we have a very short time horizon for planning and implementation. 2028 is gonna come quicker than we think. And we're a startup. We have one staff right now, Pua Anna. And what this authority needs is someone who is experienced in leading a very public agency, a very new agency, and getting it running quick. Although I'm only in my second meeting as a board member, I am familiar with the application process for the executive director from when I was counsel for this board. And I know the work that went into the solicitation process, the vetting of the applicants. So I'm comfortable with making a decision today. I respect the concerns that all the testifiers in opposition raised. But I think, and the other board members have already raised it, that it's important to emphasize that the executive director is an at-will position, subject to the evaluation and oversight of this board. I also want to emphasize that, and John's already answered this question from member Kudo, that the executive director implements what this board decides. And additionally to that, there's another layer of oversight, and the Board of Land and Natural Resources is the current landowner and the future partner in stewardship, and will continue to exercise oversight on the regulatory issues regarding the conservation use or the conservation district and the use within the district. So there's multiple layers of oversight and accountability in place that makes me feel comfortable, that we're not going to be straying into those concerning realms that was raised. So for those reasons, I believe that Mr. DeFries is qualified to help stand up this authority and to implement the actions and policies of this board. So I'm going to be voting.
Anyone else? Anakila.
I just want to always like to speak to and remind for us all that in many ways this authority, though it's always stated came out of the legislature, it was a process that initiated this, but it wasn't the legislatures that caused change, an opportunity for change. It was the people. It was the people who gathered. It's the people who stood. It's those of us who ran up mountains. That's what initiated change. And that fight, even before the on the road, there's many who have fought for this mountain, for its protection for a long time and was ignored or steamrolled over. And it took the people rising up on two major occasions that eventually initiated and forced the hand for something to have to change. And so I just want to bring that back, that even the initiation of this board began is one step or one path that's come from the movement of the people. And so to hear our community, the voices, we can see many organizational voices, but many of those organizations were not on the Mauna. But we hear the people. And so for myself, I'm actually very uncomfortable voting today. In knowing the feel, and we as we know, this authority is already, it is change, and change is never welcomed very well by all parties, and so it is an uphill climb And so I know for myself stepping onto this that it was going to be an uphill battle with a lot of different struggles and uncomfortable decisions to be made. But of course, we are looking for the long-term goal. And so it's a very challenging space to be, but also understanding the processes that we need to be moving on. That, like I mentioned earlier, the state is very slow in its processes, and is very unpracticed in actually how to set up agencies and offices. And that's something that we've all learned in this first year, is how very difficult it is to make something happen. And so there is that need, and I mahalo everyone on this board who's been going up and over and beyond to do legwork, and we're all volunteering here. And so I would just want to put that out there on record as well too. I was actually quite surprised on the very little applications that we actually received on something that many of us have fought for so long, or that we were that's something that's so pressing for our communities. And so I do mahalo the few that actually applied. And so in knowing the work that's ahead of us, I do also breathe in that it is the breath of our lahui in our communities that's going to sustain us. And how, as has been raised, the perception of this hui is already a challenge. And I say this openly, knowing that even I have to fight for my position again pretty soon. But opening in that I myself, I am in a realm of kanalua. Mahalo.
Oh, Manakila. Others.
Yeah, I can jump on. Oh, sorry, was somebody going? No,
go ahead.
Yeah, I can jump on. Yes, I echo all of the comments and sentiments. I want to, mahalo John. This is a big task and a big lift. Mahalo all the testimonies, and echo what Lanikila's saying. We're going to be accountable to the voice of the Mauna and the Lahui and the people. I do want everyone out there to understand, yes, we're like Lanikila, we only have certain, like he said, certain amount of applicants, people that were willing to try to take on this task, which is monumental. I get the rightful historical trauma that we have around a better future for Mauna Kea. I have the doubts, for myself, just how is this all going to all work sometimes, even while I'm volunteering time away from my family and dedicating, pigs and all these working groups to get this established. I know in my time on the Water Commission, in some ways similar, water drained and starved from communities for generations. Went across Hawaii and saw tremendous warriors and Lohaina that were fighting for water that, their tutu guys started and never saw. And something we did there was to try to get runs on the board, do something different to show that the commission could operate different. And John, we all have our baggage, and I just, I'm going to vote to support you and this appointment today, given the circumstances. But with all the leo and mana that I have, like, this is so important to do it right, to get it right for our people in our community, and to try to do something, different and better for the Mauna. So we have to get past the old rhetorics. And stand for a more just future for our Mauna together. Not easy to do in these confines of this structure. We all understand the legacy of historical injustice on our Aina and our kingdom and where we are today. So I know you're going, I read Antipoa's testimony. She said she's 100% behind you and she's known you for 40 years. And, I respect that. So, yeah, I'll be voting in support and look forward to working together on this model.
Any others?
I just jump in and say, in hearing everything that everybody has shared, my biggest concern is still the optic. And it comes across as being just the perpetuation of status quo. And that's a really big concern for me, because we're supposed to not just be different, but we're supposed to look differently. And so unfortunately, in my own mind, that is where what Lanakila was sharing is that we've gotten here by the people, and there are some voices out there that shared their opinions for us that I feel need to be acknowledged and heard. And so, I'll share that.
Anyone else? Let me share my thoughts. I think the word trust that has been uttered many times during this last couple of hours is what we're about. We gotta establish trust with the Lahui, with the community. We have to establish trust with each other. We have to establish trust with John if he gets selected. But that only comes with time and kind of what John alluded to, when we get to know each other better, right? Part of the reason that we're doing this hiring the way we're doing is to be able to communicate exactly what we're doing and what people are feeling, what we're feeling, so that people better understand us and hopefully start towards the road of trust. I am confident about John's ability to work in very split type of contentious type of atmospheres, that he will have the ability to build trust. At the same time, I'm hoping that all of us will build trust with him. And the idea that, we as a body, that Paul mentioned, that we as a body are the ones that are going to determine direction. And if we find that John is not following that direction, we have, as Antinoino said, have a recourse to do that. I don't think that's going to happen, but I think that we will be able to sort of monitor and make sure that the administration, whoever it is acting according to our direction. And I'm going to tell you if there's somebody that came in with differing perspectives, we would have the same issue if that person was not following whatever the direction of the group was, right? This group. So it's incumbent upon all of us to make sure that we're going down the road that we as a collective group, and our responsibilities to each other too, right? Once we decide we're going as a group here, we cannot have guys floating outside of that's part of being part of a group. If you're part of a team, just because things not going your way, you can't say, I gotta take my ball home, I'm going home, right? But it's a learning process for all of us. It's a experience that each of us have to have with each other. I told somebody, hey, 1 year ago, I didn't know any of you guys. I didn't know nothing about it. And part of the reason why I keep on harping about sunshine and how that is decreasing communication when we should be increasing communication. That to me is increasing communication is the way that we're gonna move forward. Increasing communication between all of us, with us and John, with us in the community, is the only way we can move forward. So based upon his experience I'm not focusing on his experience as a tourism guy or as a developer, but just having think about several months ago with HTA, right? He had to maneuver and bring people together to ultimately kind of have a new direction for tourism. But that experience is what we need. That ability to communicate to others is what we need. But at the end of the day, all of us have the responsibility to decide the direction that we're moving. So with that, I will be voting to affirm his contract or to hire him as a executive director. Anyone else want to speak? If not, I think because of the nature of this, probably we gotta go person by person. Oh, before I forget, Rich Matsuda is traveling and actually sent me an email with his thoughts. Just generally, unfortunately, he couldn't participate because of his travel commitments, but it's just a short statement that he wanted to share with all of you guys. I regret missing this meeting due to a prior work travel commitments. The MKSOA executive director must have strong experience to lead the organization through a very complex, time-constrained transition. And they must also be in the middle of a community of widely diverse, deeply held perspectives about Mauna Kea, which requires the courage, will, and experience to engage in our period. In our board's recruitment process, John DeFries emerged as a clear choice for me, and I would support his hiring. So that was from Rich. Yeah. Okay, with that, the motion that's before all of us is to hire, the way it's framed is to hire John DeFries as our executive director under the terms that I described earlier to all of you. So with that, I'm just going to Pomai unfortunately had to go do a class right now, so she's unable to join. So I'm just gonna do it this way because it's easier, because I can't read my thing on the too small, the letters. So I know I'm gonna vote yes. And then I'm gonna ask Noi Wong Wilson, who's next on the screen, on my screen, how she intends to vote.
Am I unmuted? Yes, I vote yes.
Paul, you're next on my screen.
I vote yes.
Okay, Kalehua,
No, sorry.
Ryan,
Yes.
Kamana,
Yes.
Ben,
I vote yes.
Lanakila. You muted Lanakila.
With respect, no.
Doug. You're frozen, Doug, I think. Doug? Okay, so as it stands.
yes.
Okay. I think he said yes. So the vote, as I counted, is 7-2. So the motion is carried. So we'll go forward. I think, John, to your point earlier, John DeFries, to your point earlier, that the concerns that were raised both by the testifiers and those that voted no, is like you say, not something to be emotional about, but it's something to learn from and something that we're going to have to address going forward. And to tell you the truth, it's going to be our actions and your actions rather than what we say that's going to carry the day up. Okay. So with that, our next meeting is going to be on March 14th. We will have a talk story session the night before on March 13th in Hilo. More to talk about what we're doing as an organization. So let me just close and, we'll adjourn the meeting. Having, people always try to have unanimous votes like that. I don't believe in that. I think that everybody should vote their conscience and have it is, because it makes for a better organization when you disagree because you truly, disagreement for just to be disagreeable is not good. But when you truly hold something in your heart and you want to take a position contrary to where the majority, that's good. Because we're only gonna come better as a group when we share the different perspectives and we have that discussion. So thanks to everybody. I know this has been a long meeting, been hard, difficult. With that, I'm gonna adjourn.
Wait, need a motion?
Okay.
I
Motion
move
to,
we adjourn.
oh, that was fast. Okay, all those in favor, raise your hand to adjourn. All right, thank you.
Hey. Mahalo.